Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moikins from Big Mountain Studio, and in this brand new series you're going to learn a few different things. The first thing you're going to learn is how to create a reusable pop-up, and it's a pop-up that you can use anywhere within your application, no matter where your view controllers are. And then I'm going to have 3 more videos that are going to teach you 3 different ways on how to pass data from your pop-up back to your view controller. And finally at the end, I'm going to teach you about memory leaks and how to find out if you have a memory leak and then how to fix it. Because with the different ways of passing data back from your pop-up to your view controller, you can easily create a memory leak. So I'm going to show you how to tell if you have one and then how to fix it. Okay, let's get started. For this project, I'm going to create a tabbed application because we want many view controllers right away that we can use to call a pop-up that we have. And I'll just call this Reusable Popups. And I'll just save it to my desktop. Okay, so this is the default tab application. It comes with 2 view controllers. And from these view controllers, we want to be able to call a pop-up, the same pop-up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a pop-up here, a new view controller. And this will be my pop-up. Okay, to create the pop-up, what I'm going to do is add a UI view, and this will actually be my pop-up, is this UI view right here. And let's get it centered. So when a person wants to select a date or a time, this is what will show up. Now for a pop-up, the background can't be white or else you won't be able to see the view controller that's opening it. So I want to see the view controller behind it a little bit. So I'm going to select on the view, and then I'm going to change the color. And let's make it like a lighter gray. And I'm going to give it a 50% opacity, which is kind of like transparency, so you can see through it a little bit. Okay, there we go. Now let's create a title for it. So I'm just going to grab a label and stick it on here. Stick it right up in the corner there. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, and we'll center it, and we'll just say select date. And we'll give that a color too. Okay, and let's change it to white. There we go. Okay, so we have those things. And now we want our date time picker. And let's make this a little bit smaller here. And for now, we just want to show the date. And finally, we need a button to select and close this pop-up. So we'll just call this save date. Okay, good. So there's our pop-up. I'm just going to set some constraints. So when I resize this window, that button comes down with me. There we go. And then for this, okay, this looks good. We want it to go all the way across. That's fine. And for the label, we also want that to go all the way across as well. Okay, good. All right, awesome. We have our pop-up here. And now we need to create some outlets so we can keep track of like what date was picked. And remember, also I said we want to be able to reuse this pop-up to be able to select a date or a time. So I want to create outlets for all these controls so I can change the title up here, this label, and I can also change this button text. Okay, but before we do that, we are going to need a view controller for this. So let's add a view controller. It's going to be a Cocoa Touch class. There we go, view controller, and we'll call this date pop-up view controller. Okay. Then we have to assign it to our scene. Now let's create some outlets. First, I'm just going to get rid of this template code here. Okay, so let's create our outlets. This will be the title label. And then I'll just call this a date picker. Then we want an outlet for the button. Okay, good. And then we'll also want an action. So when they click on Save Date, we want to close the pop-up. There we go. Save date, touch up inside. Okay, and we want to dismiss this pop-up. There, just like that. Now after the pop-up is dismissed, we have this completion that we can run, but I don't have any code to run right now. And as you can see, that question mark, it's optional, so we can just delete that. There, just leave it like that. Okay, we have our pop-up, doesn't do anything right now, so let's add some ways to open this pop-up. And what I'm going to do is, let's go back here, and we want these view controllers to open up this pop-up. So let's add some controls here. We know we want a label, and this will be the value that we select, and then we want a button to open up the pop-up. And I'm not going to get fancy here. This isn't one of those applications where I'm going to teach you something about UI or make it look pretty, because the main thing I want to focus on is just this pop-up right here and reusing this pop-up. So here we'll have select a date. Okay. And then we want it to open up this pop-up right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the present modally to show as a pop-up. There's one more thing that we have to do in order to show this as a pop-up, because if we just run it right now, let me show you something. Okay, if I click select date, now notice I can't see the view controller behind it. So there's something that I have to change in order to do that. And there's two ways. If I click on this segue and look at the properties, you'll notice there's this presentation property. And what I want is over current context. So that just puts this pop-up view on top of the view controller that's calling it. I can do it that way. So there's two ways to do this. I can do it through the segue, or I can actually just click on the scene itself, and you'll notice there's a presentation property here too. And you can select over current context. Now because this is going to be a reusable pop-up, I want to set this property on the pop-up itself, on the view controller itself, because you can open up this pop-up in many different ways. You don't have to use a segue. And if I create another segue from the second view controller to here, then I don't want to have to keep setting that property. So I'm going to leave this property on the pop-up itself, the over current context. Now if I run it, you can see behind it a little bit. You see the select date and the label back here. Okay, good. So how do we reuse this? Before I get too far into this, I just want to explain what we're going to do in this video. I'm basically just going to show you how to create a reusable pop-up, and we're not going to pass any data yet. That'll be in the next 3 videos. I'm going to show you 3 different ways on how to get this date over into this view controller. So right now we're just talking about reusability. So pretend that we have these controls here too. There, like this. So now you want to open up this date from this view controller. Well, you could, an option that you could go with is you could just copy this scene right here and paste it in here. So now you have 2 of them. And then this can open up this pop-up. You could do that, but this is kind of like considered a poor programming practice, because say I want to make a change to this title color. Well, I could make a change here. But then I'd have to go to my other view controllers and make the same change there. And that's not something I really want to do. So as a programming principle, you basically only want to do things once. You don't want to have duplicate code. You don't want to have duplicate views that you're using in many different places. Optimally, you only want one of everything. So if you have to make a change, you only have to make it in one place. So let's delete that. We're not going to go with that idea. And instead, we can just do this. Present modally. Now we're still using the same pop-up view controller. Now we're using segues to open up this pop-up. But what if we have another view controller that isn't on this storyboard? Or what if this pop-up isn't on this storyboard? And what I would recommend is I would actually recommend taking this pop-up and putting it onto its own storyboard. So let's do that. And in order to put this on its own storyboard, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it, then I'm going to come to Editor and say Refactor to Storyboard. So it's going to refactor this view controller onto its own storyboard. And we'll just call this Date Popup View Controller. Awesome. So now it's its own storyboard. It put it up here. I've noticed it's done this before. It doesn't keep it in the same folder. So I'm going to drag it here. I'm going to keep the storyboard and the view controller together. And then if we go back to the main storyboard, you'll notice that it leaves a reference, a storyboard reference. Okay, that's fine. Now let's do one more thing. I want to show you another scenario where we can call the same pop-up from a different storyboard. So let's add another storyboard. And we're going to select storyboard down here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this select time view controller. Now the reason why I add view controller on there is because what I try to do in my projects is I try to keep each storyboard with only one view controller. And we're going to need a view controller class to go with this scene. Alright, there we go. Now let's just go back here. We'll select the scene. I like to use the word scene because there's two different things. There's the scene and then there's the view controller. The scene is the UI. And I call it scene because if you look up here, you notice it's called view controller scene. So that way, if I call it a view controller, you might wonder, am I talking about the UI part or this class? Because this is also a view controller. So just for clarity, this file I'll call the view controller and the UI I'll call the scene. Okay. Okay, so this view controller will also open up the pop-up. So we need to get some controls on there. So let's just add our label. And then we need a button. And this will be select time. And then this will open up our pop-up. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a storyboard reference, which is this control right here. And this is going to represent my date pop-up. Okay, for a storyboard reference, if you're just creating it, you want to select the storyboard that you want to open. But, you know, a storyboard can have many different scenes on it. And that's where you would type in this reference ID. But since there's only one on mine, you see the default in the gray here, it says initial view controller. That's the one I'm going to be opening. So if we just take a look at our storyboard here, we want to select this and just make sure that this has the is initial view controller. So if I want to reference this storyboard, it's automatically going to open up this scene right here first. Okay, now that I have the reference there, I can just drag and drop onto there and say present modally. Alright, now one of the things is we want to be able to test this, right? So we can't test this right now in its current state. Yeah, what we need to do is be able to add this scene to our tab view controller. So let's go back here. And now we need a storyboard reference so we can link this tab bar controller to our select time storyboard. Select time view controller, there it is. And then we just want to right click and click on there. And this is actually going to be a relationship segue, view controllers. You notice that little icon here is the same as these. Okay, and you notice there's a third item on here now. Oh, you know what? Let me teach you guys something here. This is interesting. Let's run the project and see what it looks like. Okay, we have a failure. Let's see what it is. Okay. References the initial view controller. Select time view controller. Has no entry point. Okay, basically what that means is we need to come in here, and this view controller, we have to set this as the initial view controller. There we go. Okay, let's try it now. Okay, now look down here. See, there's a first, a second, and we can't see a button or text for our third tab. And this is something that I've noticed that some people have had trouble with. How do you get a button and the text for a third tab when it's a storyboard reference? You're using a storyboard reference like this right here. So you see it here. What some people do is they actually create a view controller on here, like drag the view controller on here and then hook it up as a reference. And then when they use editor, refactor storyboard, it automatically handles this item right here, the third item that we're talking about. And notice these other view controllers, they have this tab bar down here, and this is actually where you change it. You can call it whatever you want, change the image. For this tab bar item though, it doesn't exist if we look at our select time view controller. There's nothing at the bottom. So what we need to do is we need to add that tab bar item manually to our view controller here. And it's this one right here, tab bar item. Here, let's just expand that so you can see it. Tab bar item represents an item on a UI tab bar object. That's exactly what we need. So let's drag that on there, and now we can give it a name. I'm just going to go with custom. We'll make it like reasons. Yeah, that's kind of like, looks like a little clock. Select time. So now if we run it, let's see what it looks like. There you go. Now it shows up. Okay, good. So if we come here and click select time, it works perfectly. All right, great. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to show you guys before we end off here, and that is how to open up the storyboard if you don't want to use a segue. So let's take the example that we have here with the select time view controller. And instead of opening it this way, let's just delete this. And we're going to create an outlet, an action outlet for the select time. And then we're going to open up that pop-up through code. Oh, wrong view controller here. Let's go to automatic. I'm just going to delete this. Okay, now to open up another view controller in code, the first thing you want to do is start with a storyboard. You want to get a reference to the storyboard that your scene or your view controller is in. So storyboard equals storyboard, there it is. Okay, we want this one right here. And so the first parameter is a string, and that is the name, the actual file name of our storyboard. Let's show that so we can get a better idea here. Actually, let's just go straight into the code at this point. Okay, so let's go back, take a look at this again. Okay, so the first one we want is a string, which is the name of the storyboard. This is the name of the storyboard right here, date pop-up view controller. And the second one is called bundle. And bundle is kind of like your project. This project right here, Reusable Popups, that's a bundle. So for here, if we just leave it nil, then by default, if it's nil, it'll use the bundle that you're currently in. So we'll just leave that as nil since it's inside this same project. Okay, now once we have the storyboard, we want to be able to get a scene or a view controller somewhere on that storyboard. And we'll just call it Popup. And it'll be storyboard. And we want to instantiate a view controller. Okay, you have a couple options here. One is instantiate initial view controller. So that's the one that has a little arrow pointed to it. And in our case, let's take a look at our storyboard that we want to instantiate. It's this right here. You remember earlier we set is initial view controller. So if you use that option, then it'll just open up whatever view controller has this arrow on it. And that's good enough for us. Instantiate initial view controller. Okay, and once we have that, then what we want to do is we want to present it. Which is this function right here. But it's kind of weird. It's like, where's the present word? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened to it. Okay, and we want to show the pop-up view controller. Animate it, sure. And then completion. There we go. There's nothing we want to do after it's open, so let's just delete that. Okay, so let's test this out and make sure it works. Fail. Okay, what does it say? Value of optional type UI view controller not unwrapped. Oh, okay. So it looks like initial view controller. Let's take a look at that again. Let's look at our help. So it looks like it's optional here. See that question mark behind it? So I guess there's a possibility that a storyboard doesn't have a initial view controller, so it could return null. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, yes, there is one, and then that should work. The exclamation point just says you're asserting that yes, it does have one. And some people, some people might complain. And, I've seen people do this where they're like, you should never explicitly unwrap something because it could be dangerous. So they might say something like, well, you might want to use if, if let pop up, then you don't need that. And then that basically says, if you did find one, then present it. That might be a more safe way to do it. But I actually don't agree in this case. I've been developing for a long time, and when you first start, you're like, oh yeah, let's do everything the safe way. And over time, I noticed as I became more experienced, there's actually times when you do want it to fail if it doesn't find something, because it doesn't make sense. So let's go back here, and let me just kind of describe why I want this to fail. So basically what I'm saying is if there is an initial view controller on this storyboard, if I somehow got rid of it, then the app will crash. It will throw an error and it will crash. But that's okay. For me, that's okay. I actually want it to crash because it's telling me that there is something wrong. If I go back to making it safe, it won't crash, but it won't work either. And then it's not as obvious when I go to fix it, because I will have to fix it. It's not as obvious to me what the problem is. And I'll have to go through and debug it and find out what is the problem. So I actually do want it to crash in this case, if there's a problem. I am assuming that there's always an initial view controller. So that's something to keep in mind too. As a developer, as you start developing, there's times when you want to do things a safe way, because if something is nil, you have another way of handling it. But for me, if something is nil and it should not be nil, I want it to crash and I want to fix it before I actually deploy it to the App Store. Otherwise, if I safely handle it, I might not know it's failing and it goes to the App Store anyway. And I find out later that this one function keeps failing and I never knew about it. There are ways to mitigate that possibility, with tests and good testing, but that's a different topic altogether. So in this case, I don't care if I explicitly unwrap it and it will crash if there's a nil, because I'm going to want to know about that and I will fix it. All right, guys, now is the end of the video. All right, good. So the next videos, I'm going to take the next step, and what we're going to do is we're going to get a value from that pop-up and pass it back to your view controller. The first one we're going to look at is using the notification center. So if you're interested in learning how to do that, then just keep watching the next video and I'll teach you how to use the notification center to pass data back. And remember, I'm going to teach you 2 other ways to pass data back too. I recommend you watch all of them and decide which one is more appropriate or easier for you to use in your project. Alright guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it on social media. And if you really like to help out, you can also contribute a translation for the title and the description of the video. Thanks guys.